Image is a podcast of Redemption Church located in Huntington, West Virginia for the purpose of equipping believers to fully engage culture in a theologically faithful way.
Okay, so we've been still going through the series on the minor prophets, and as we covered in the previous podcast about the where the minor prophets were, whether they were in the kingdom of Israel or the kingdom of Judah, but we didn't really discuss why those two nations, why the nation of Israel did split into the northern and the southern kingdom. And so that's essentially what we're going to talk about today, some of the historical context, what we know from the Bible, and we'll go from there. So first, let's start with why was there a kingdom? And so this all starts with the fact that the people of Israel demanded a king. We saw this in 1 Samuel 8. So when Samuel became old, he made his sons judges over Israel. The name of his firstborn son was Joel, and the name of his second, Abijah. They were judges in Beersheba, yet his sons did not walk in his ways, but turned aside after gain. They took bribes and perverted justice. So essentially, they didn't do what they were supposed to do. And because of that, the people were not happy with how things were going. So then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, "Behold, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations." So essentially they said, this isn't working. Let's do what all the other nations around us are doing. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, "Give us a king to judge us." And Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, "Obey the voice of the people and all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them, according to all the deeds that they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are also doing to you. Now then, obey their voice, only you shall solemnly warn them and show them the ways of the king who shall reign over them." So, the people were not happy with the judges, and so they wanted the same system that the other nations around them wanted. And then Samuel knows this is not a good thing, and then God tells him to warn them, and this is Samuel's warning, which comes immediately after what we just read. So Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking for a king from him. He said, "These will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots." So essentially he's going to turn them into soldiers, and he's going to make them go into war. "And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest, and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his servants. He will take the 10th of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to his officers and to his servants. He will take your male servants and female servants and the best of your young men and your donkeys and put them to his work. He will take the 10th of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer to you in that day." So essentially Samuel's saying, you're going to regret this. You're going to cry out to the Lord to save you, and he won't answer you in that day. So, but the Lord grants Israel's request. But the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel. They did not listen to his wisdom, and they said, "No, but there shall be a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. And when Samuel had heard all the words of the people, he repeated them in the ears of the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, obey their voice and make them a king. Samuel then said to the men of Israel, go, every man to his city. All right. So, Israel demands a king. We saw this in 1 Samuel 8. So they demand a king. Samuel warns them against the king, of them having a king. But despite that, the people still want a king. They want something that's similar to the nations around them because they're not happy with how the judges have been ruling the 12 tribes of Israel. And then the Lord grants this request. So this is where we have King Saul. And so, Josh has covered this a lot. He's gone through the story of Saul and then David. So, Saul becomes king. The Philistines invade. They send Goliath. Then David comes. David becomes a great hero because he slays the giant. And then one thing leads to another. Saul gets jealous, chases David. At some point he wants to kill David. He takes a spear and tries to attack him, and David flees. But we know that story because Josh has covered it. Eventually Saul dies in battle along with his son. David comes in, and then, he eventually becomes king. And so this is when David becomes king, and then he unites the 12 tribes into a single kingdom. So, but then we also have a promise from God to David that his kingdom his kingdom and his lineage will be established forever. And so this is seen in 2 Samuel 7. When your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. So he's talking about Solomon, because this is the person that's going to come after David. He's going to build the temple, so this is Solomon. So I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. This is just like what Josh says. God doesn't have grandchildren. He only has children. So God says that Solomon will be to him a son. So when he commits iniquity, I will discipline him with the rod of men, with the stripes of the sons of men. But my steadfast love will not depart from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I put away from before you. And your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me. Your throne shall be established forever. So, Israel demanded a king. Samuel warred against them. The Lord grants them a king. First, they have Saul. Saul did not rule faithfully. And then, as God just mentioned in his promise to David, if there is iniquity, there will be discipline. And in this case, Saul's discipline was, he died. David replaced him. And then now God has a promise to David about his kingdom being established forever. And so that's what we read in 2 Samuel 7. So, so why, we're getting closer to the point. So why the kingdom split? So for decades, Solomon follows God. He followed with wisdom, and he led in the ways of his father, King David. But eventually he falls off. So in verses, in 1 Kings 3-10, that's where we hear about King Solomon ruling faithfully. He builds the temple. He rules with wisdom. But then there's a period of time where things go in the wrong direction. In 1 Kings 11, this is where Solomon turns from the Lord and things start going in the wrong direction. Now King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women. So, since we've been going through the minor prophets, Josh has been going through how the prophets have been speaking about the surrounding nations. So some of these should be familiar because these are the nations that are surrounding the kingdom of Israel. So, from the nations concerning which the Lord has said to the people of Israel, you shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they with you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. So Solomon clung to these in love, and he had 700 wives who were princesses and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. For when Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. For Solomon went after Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. So Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not wholly follow the Lord, as David his father had done. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Molech, the abomination of the Ammonites, on the mountain east of Jerusalem. And so he did for all his foreign wives who made offerings and sacrifice to their gods. And this is where, if you dig into the details, some of these foreign gods are I mean, it's beyond. It's hard to come up with words with some of the things that they would do. So, for example, Molech, was a foreign god that would demand the sacrifice of infants, and they would have these metal braziers that were shaped like, based upon the descriptions, shaped like, in the form of a demon, with these open bellies that they would heat up, and they would place their sacrifices in. And these are the things that Solomon did. And it was evil. And so for this reason, God will discipline Solomon. So, we at this point, we've had 3 kings. One of them did okay. That was David. Saul did not work out. Solomon, for some period of time, for decades, he ruled well, but then he started falling into idolatry. So he followed the ways of his foreign wives. He started following the ways of the foreign gods, making temples to them. He started sacrificing to them, and then because of this, he dies and is succeeded by Rehoboam, his son. So, and this is where things get to the point where why did the nation split? So first we got to go before we get to specifically to what Rehoboam may have done to contribute to the nation splitting. We start in 1 Kings 11. So Ahijah, the prophets, he was a prophet, and he issued a warning. And this is what we read starting in verse 29 of 1 Kings 11. So, and at that time when Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem, the prophet Ahijah, the Shilonite, found him on the road. Now Ahijah had dressed himself in a new garment, and the 2 of them were alone in open country. Then Ahijah laid hold on the new garment that was on him, and tore it into 12 pieces. And he said to Jeroboam, take for yourself 10 pieces. For thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, behold, I am about to tear the kingdom from the hand of Solomon, and I will give you 10 tribes. But he shall have 1 tribe for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, the city that I have chosen out of all of the tribes of Israel. Because they have forsaken me and worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Chemosh, the god of Moab, and Milcom, the god of the Ammonites, and they have not walked in my ways, doing what is right in my sight and keeping my statutes and my rules, as David his father did. Nevertheless, I will not take the whole kingdom out of his hand, but I will make him ruler all the days in his life, for the sake of David my servant, whom I chose, who kept my commandments and my statutes. So then he also continued to say, but I will take the kingdom out of his son's hand and will give it to you, 10 tribes. Yet to his son I will give 1 tribe, that David my servant may always have a lamp before me in Jerusalem, the city where I have chosen to put my name. And I will take you, and you shall reign over all that your soul desires, and you shall be king over Israel. And if you will listen to all that I command you, and will walk in my ways, and do what is right in my eyes by keeping my statutes and my commandments, as David my servant did, I will be with you, and will build you a sure house as I built for David, and I will give Israel to you, and I will afflict the offspring of David because of this, but not forever. So there's a little glimmer of hope. So he will discipline, but it's not going to be forever. Solomon sought therefore to kill Jeroboam, but Jeroboam arose and fled into Egypt to Shishak, king of Egypt, and was in Egypt until the death of Solomon. So eventually Solomon dies. He tried to kill Jeroboam, but Jeroboam fled and ran away. So here we have the reason. So why did the kingdom split? Is because God foreordained it, and this was punishment. And he said that he's going to preserve some of this for David. He's going to keep Jerusalem, and he's going to keep that city, and he's going to preserve it for King David and for his line. But this is why it's split, because the people and their leaders were not following in his way. So this was seen as a punishment. And we can see this, as he made his promise to David. He said, in the case of iniquity, there will be discipline. And he's going to discipline them, by using other men. In this case, as we've learned from the Minor Prophets series that Joshua was going through, armies are going to come in and then they're going to do bad things. But here we can see that the reason is because God is choosing this as a punishment. But what about the nuts and bolts of what happened? And so, from the level of the people, what was there, what contributed to their decision? Because God will use the people and use their emotions and use them to make this actually happen. So, on the personal level, what made the people want to, basically have a civil war and then split? So it starts in 1 Kings 12. So this is speaking to Rehoboam, the son of Solomon. So your father made our yoke heavy. And so by that, they're talking about, Solomon had a heavy tax on the kingdom. And this is one of the things that was first used to fund the building of the temple, but then he continued heavy taxations, and this was to float, based upon what I've read, float the building of some of these temples to the foreign gods. And so the people came to him, so the leaders of the different tribes, because even though the kingdom was united, the 12 tribes were united as the kingdom of Israel, each tribe still had their leaders. So they said, your father Solomon made our yoke heavy, the taxes are too high, so now therefore lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke on us, and we will serve you. So this was verse 4, 1 Kings 12. And then what happens is Rehoboam leaves. He talks to his advisors, who were all young people just like him, and young people with not great ideas, and they said, basically, don't listen to these people. Let's just continue to tax them. So he picked back up in 1 Kings 12, verse 12. So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam the third day, as the king said, come to me again the third day. Because he said, give me 3 days. I'll talk it over with my people. Come back and I'll have a decision for you. So give me 3 days. And so they came back on that third day. And the king answered the people harshly, and forsaking the counsel that the old men had given him, because he didn't listen to the old wise men, he listened to the young men that aren't so wise. He spoke to them according to the counsel of the young men, saying, my father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. You thought you had bad taxes. We're gonna tax you up to your eyeballs now. So my father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. Like you thought you had it bad with my dad, you just wait. So the king did not listen to the people, for it was a turn of affairs brought about by the Lord, that he might fulfill his word. So going back to what Ahijah said, that God said that he's going to discipline his people, he's going to split the kingdom. And he basically used Jeroboam and Rehoboam. So because the people were angered at the taxes, this is basically what caused the split in the civil war. So this was a turn of affairs brought by the Lord, that he might fulfill his word. which the Lord spoke by Ahijah the Shilonite to Jeroboam the son of Nebat. So we can continue on. And when all Israel saw that the king did not listen to them, the people answered the king, "What portion do we have in David? We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel. Look now to your own house, David." So Israel went to their tents, but Rehoboam reigned over the people of Israel who lived in the cities of Judah. Then King Rehoboam sent Adoram, who was taskmaster over the forced labor, and all Israel stoned him to death with stones. And King Rehoboam hurried to mount his chariots to flee to Jerusalem. So basically, he, in this process, he was basically calling to his taskmaster. So this is the one that was over the forced labor. He was going to be, all right, we're just going to get these people. We're going to make them do what they want to do. But the people rebelled. So the overlords were sent to basically, corral the people. And the people were like, no. They start stoning them. So they start killing the overlords. And then Rehoboam, who is the king, he flees to Jerusalem. He leaves. So Israel has been in rebellion against the house of David to this day. And this is where, maybe one day we can talk about if this is like, what it means in the original language by this phrase, to this day. So, when all Israel heard that Jeroboam had returned, they sent and called him to the assembly and made him king over all Israel. So this is where, so Rehoboam left. And then this basically made room for Jeroboam to become king over this section of Israel. So there was none that followed the house of David, but the tribe of Judah only. So this is where, the split became the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. There's a little bit more that happened here. So essentially, there was a period of time where, there were arms, basically armies being raised. They were going to have, they were going to fight for the land, but then God basically made a decree that you're not going to do that, and they did listen to that. So there was a rebellion. Rehoboam was basically kicked out, but there at this point wasn't a war between the two nations, unless my scholarship is not that great. So Rehoboam basically left, established his capital in Jerusalem, and he became the first king of Judah. And then Jeroboam, there should be a name right here, he basically made his capital in Bethel, but immediately went in the wrong direction. So instead of, facilitating worship of the one true God, he basically made substitute worship centers with golden calves, and basically created his own, pretty much jump straight into idol worship that is not in line with the ways of God. Okay, so let's recap. So why did we have a kingdom in the first place, or why did they have a kingdom in the first place? First of all, Israel wanted a king. They were not happy with the system of judges, and they wanted something that was similar to the kingdoms outside of Israel. The whole "the grass is greener on the other side" type of mentality. Samuel warned them, this is not going to work out for you. This is not going to be a good thing. But still, because they wanted it, God gave them that. Then they had David following Saul, who was succeeded by Solomon. Solomon, falls into idolatry. His son Rehoboam takes over. Rehoboam continues the taxation that his father had, and then even proposed to make it worse, and then even wanted to make things more severe when it came to the punitive measures. So this led to the rebellion of the northern kingdom. They basically kicked Rehoboam out. Jeroboam was then made king of Israel. Jeroboam establishes substitute worship of the golden calves at Dan and Bethel, and this basically brings us to the point where we have the two southern kingdoms. We have the period of the minor prophets, and some of them have already been active, before the split and the Civil War. But that's why they split. One, they were not following the ways of God, and God used that as a mechanism to discipline them. And then, but the nuts and bolts of it were, he used Rehoboam, basically made him arrogant, made him foolish, made him listen to poor wisdom, and that basically enraged the people enough to basically rebel and to split the kingdom. All right, so why does this matter? One, it does give us context to help understand the historical foundation of what's happening in the series that we're going through now with the minor prophets. So this basically sets the stage for people like Hosea, Amos, and Micah. They minister to these divided kingdoms and calling them back to faithfulness, because that's why they got to that place. That's why they got there in the first place. Their leaders were not following God, and so there was punishment that was dished out to call them back. So this highlights the danger of pride, idolatry, and injustice, because that's also how they got there. With Solomon, he started worshiping foreign gods. With Jeroboam and Rehoboam, they were prideful, and they also had their own idolatry themselves, especially Jeroboam with the golden calves. And what does this mean for us today? So one thing we can learn from this is that when as Christians, when our leaders, and this could be us because we're leaders in our own homes. I'm speaking from the perspective that I have kids. I'm a leader over them. Division, will come when we abandon God's covenant. So if I'm not following God, there's going to be division in my house between me and my wife Laura. But also we can remain hopeful because God is faithful to his promises. So just like what happened in this period of time where the kingdom split, he left us a glimmer of hope. He preserved Judah, he preserved Jerusalem, and through that, he continued David's lineage, and eventually that's how we got Jesus, and Jesus is our ultimate hope. So even in these periods of time where we're being disciplined, so maybe we're in a series of or a moment in our life where we're being disciplined, just like the kingdom of Israel and Judah are being disciplined, as we're hearing a lot about with these minor prophets. God is faithful to us, as we just need to maintain our faith in him. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaway messages we have. But really, this wasn't meant to have a big takeaway message. It was meant to just provide at least a historical viewpoint that explains what happened. Why is there a northern kingdom? Why is there a southern kingdom? What led to that?
If you've enjoyed this podcast, you can hear more of Image on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast at, or at redemptionwv.com/image, where you can also find any resources mentioned in our podcast and links to follow us on social media. And you can join the conversation by contacting us with any questions, feedback, or topic suggestions. Also, please rate our podcast and write a review at wherever you get your podcast, and that will help us ensure that this content gets to more people.